Hello, this is Rick Jordan, the Church Resources Coordinator for the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship of North Carolina. Welcome to our webinar today on Women in Ministry, 3 Stories. Our presenters today are Amy Grizzle Kane, Lynn Rhoades, and Eileen Mitchell-Larimore. They will each tell you more of their stories as we go along in our presentation, and we'll also have a wrap-up with Gore Chappell, who is the new Executive Director of Baptist Women in Ministry of North Carolina. And if you hear one of us say BWIM, that's what that stands for, Baptist Women in Ministry. Today's webinar will begin with 3 presentations. And if you have questions or comments to ask, you can enter them in the question box at any time. You can find the question box at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A, and they will have their presentations, and then I'll ask questions at the very end of the presentation. Thank you for your participation in today's webinar. And just a reminder that the webinar is being recorded for Virtual Resource Library on our website. Welcome, friends. I appreciate all the time you've done to prepare this presentation, and also today that you're giving us to share your call and your path in ministry. So, Amy, we're going to begin with your story.
Great. Love being first. Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Grizzle Kane. I'm the Associate Pastor of Missions and Community Ministry at First Baptist Church, Greensboro, North Carolina. I've been here for about a year, maybe not quite a year, and I'm really enjoying my time here, but I get to share with you today kind of my story of how I came to be where I am this day, and I'm going to share with you my PowerPoint, and I will also tell you that I'm real sorry that PowerPoint is not my strongest gift, but hopefully this gives you some interesting visuals and not just my face. But I am both an ordained Baptist minister, which I'm very proud of, and I'm also a mom, which I'm very proud of, and I have felt called to be both of those. And it's been an interesting journey to navigate all of that, and so I'll talk more about that later. But I am both a minister and a mom, and enjoy doing both facets of my calling. I was born in Hale, Missouri. And I'm not going to tell you every detail of my life. Don't get scared. But I wanted to show you this Baptist church because my dad was in seminary at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kansas City, Missouri. And he was a part-time pastor of Hale Baptist Church when I was born. I was not their plan while in seminary being a part-time pastor, but I was their gift, and I got to be loved for the first time by a church family in this church. And my church families have had such a formative influence on my journey and story. Following that, we went to Dogwood Hills Baptist Church in East Point, Georgia, and this church still stands and looks like this. I think it's pretty architecturally cool to see this. But I was the preacher's kid, and frankly, I was the preacher's kid that loved the attention. I loved being spoiled. I loved having a ton of grandparents and a ton of parents and a ton of friends, and church was always a happy place for me, and that's part of what I feel in my calling to the church with others is to, I know it's idyllic, but in my mind, the best part of the church is being family for one another. And that was mostly my experience, for which I'm very thankful for. After this, my dad left Dogwood Hills, and he was pastor of a church start, Alabama Road Baptist Church, which became a building while my dad was pastoring there. But prior to our being able to build the building, we worshiped in a double-wide trailer. And so I still remember going to church in a double-wide trailer on a gravel parking lot, and eventually the church grew and we were able to raise money and build this church building. which interestingly now has been sold. The congregation moved to another location, and this is St. Mary's Orthodox Church now. But it really was. I had a variety of church experiences growing up, but again, always being loved and known by a church family, singing in choirs, getting to play on the porch of that double-wide trailer. We played Mother May I because it had a covered porch, and that's where the kids hung out some. But good memories growing up in the church. So in addition to my church families loving and playing such an important role in who I am as a minister today and what I feel the role of the church is and part of my calling, I was very thankful to have not only women, but also men invest in me along the way. But I did want to highlight two women that have had really deeply impressionable impacts on my ministry and my calling. The one on the left, Nancy Hastings Hested, she's now pastor of Circle of Mercy, I believe in Asheville, North Carolina. I believe she's co-pastor there. I don't know her well, but it's kind of a long story, but I wanted to share with you the impact that even just a chance encounter could make. A long time ago, before I was ever a student at Furman University, which I did graduate from there eventually, but while I was in high school in near Greenville, South Carolina, at Furman University, there was a pastor's school every summer. And somehow, some way, I don't even quite know how it happened, Nancy knew of me and or I was there. I can't remember all of the details, but basically she was presenting at this pastor school and asked if I would help her with a presentation. I didn't know her, never met her, and didn't really know much of what she needed me to do, except at the end, she asked me to read a passage from the book of Ruth. And so her presentation that night, I don't know how much y'all know about Nancy, but she was a pastor at a church that was affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention. And as CBF was happening and as all the things with the Southern Baptist Convention happened, she and her church were disfellowshipped from the Southern Baptist Convention. And that was a very painful experience for her. And so at this pastor's conference, one of her presentations that night was for her to articulate what it was like to be a Naomi in ministry and for me to be a Ruth in ministry. Young and fresh and feeling a call to ministry, but not exactly sure what that was going to look like. And her being broken and sad and disfellowshipped and yet, she was leading and I would follow. And so she had me read the passage in Ruth as a response to her presentation. That had such a big impact on me because Nancy was the first woman pastor I ever met. And that she would invite me to participate in a presentation like that, much less, it was truly powerful to, I had just experienced a call to ministry. I didn't really know what that would look like. I knew it was going to be hard, and to hear her say it was going to be hard, and yet she was hopeful for me, and that gave me hope that I could do this too. In college, on the right, I had the privilege of serving a student internship with Dr. Jennifer Copeland, who's now the executive director of the North Carolina Council of Churches. But at the time, she was the Methodist minister at Furman University, campus minister, and she was also a part-time pastor at Monaghan United Methodist Church, which was a small, largely older congregation in a mill village near Furman in the foothills of South Carolina. And Jenny is remarkably strong and just a real go-getter. The words are, but frankly, I just hadn't been around a woman pastor like that before. And it was inspiring. And frankly, it helped give me confidence. And she threw me in the deep end. God bless her. I don't think she knew that I could do it, or maybe she did. But she said, here's a list of people, go visit and go to the hospital. And I'm like, but wait, aren't you going to go with me? And I don't know where the hospital is. And she's like, here's a Bible study and you can teach it and you're going to preach at the end of the summer. And I was like, wait, I haven't done any of that. And she's like, well, I'll help, but you can do this. And I was like, but I don't know that I can do this. But she thought that I could. And even if she didn't know, she at least pretended to know. And again, that was such a gift to me. It gave me such great confidence in ministry to be empowered by her, to be supported by a congregation. God love them. They listened to my first sermon and pretended like they got something out of it. And that's a real gift that I was thankful that they could give me. Again, just wanted to share some opportunities and churches that I've had the privilege of serving. While I was in divinity school at Duke, I served for a summer in Pretoria, South Africa. And you can see on the left, that is an informal settlement on the outskirts of Pretoria. And I served a church that did some ministry there. It wasn't far outside of the city at all. And just the vast expanses of poverty just outside the city where there were pockets of wealth and beauty was just a really eye-opening experience and kind of getting me to see more of the world and more of how poverty can be right next door to wealth when we don't even know it. A mission church in the heart of the city that served persons with HIV, AIDS, and served and ministered to the prostitutes who were on the street at night. It was a very inner city church. There was a park right across the street from the church where I lived for the summer, and there were drug needles in the park in the morning. I wasn't allowed to leave the church at night, and I heard car chases and gunshots at night. I mean, it was very inner city, but an important place of ministry that, again, showed me a different perspective of church in a different place. Following graduation from seminary, I was able to be part of the Wilshire Baptist Church residency program. We spent many hours around this table. You may not know that the focus of that program is on preaching ministry and pastoral ministry. And I struggled a lot with, do I want to be a missions minister? Do I want to be a missionary? Do I want to serve the least of these? Because I've always felt that that was part of who I am and part of my calling. And yet I've also felt that being a pastor is part of my calling. And so can I do both of these? I'm not sure. Maybe there will be seasons where I do some of both. And so when given the opportunity, I participated in this pastoral residency where we were shaped and encouraged and mentored to be pastors. And again, spent many fun hours and hard hours around this table, having sermons critiqued and worship planning and learning from each other and with each other. But I'm very grateful to Wilshire Baptist Church and for the love and the confidence that they continue to instill in me. And again, I continue to struggle with this. I'm serving a very wealthy, by all standards, Baptist church in Dallas, Texas, which is a very wealthy place also, and a beautiful church with a beautiful church family. As a part of that experience, I was able to go on a mission trip with Wilshire to Kenya. And that's a picture of me doing that. So all along the way, even though I was pursuing pastoral ministry, missions and my heart for missions has always been something that's been there under the surface and things that I've participated in, invested in, even though my quote unquote career path was doing one thing. But that's been a tension. You know, do I serve the least of these in the poorest areas, or do I serve wealthy people in a wealthy Baptist church in a big city, to be honest? Another picture from Kenya. Then I was called to South Main Baptist Church, where I served for 10 years as a discipleship minister, serving young adults and helping lead the Sunday school and discipleship programming there. Again, an affluent, beautiful Baptist church in the heart of Houston, Texas, which is a thriving metropolis. And while there, I was able to serve on a mission trip to Coique, Peru, which is a missions commitment of that church family. Again, my primary job was discipleship. So I didn't spend a lot of time, quote unquote, in the trenches. And I've struggled with that because I've always felt like, is that my calling? And yet I've also felt called to serve Baptist churches and to help lead church families to be church family for those that are there within the church, within those communities, but also to help people understand that our family is also in Kenya. Our family is also in those informal settlements of South Africa. We just may not even be aware of that yet. While there, I helped go on some youth trips. This was a youth mission trip. Again, just different ways that I've been able to incorporate missions in my quote unquote other jobs. This was a young adult team from South Maine doing missions at doing a habitat house there in Houston. While I was at South Maine, I met my husband through eHarmony. 3 years later, we became pregnant. That wasn't really my dream. My dream was to work in the church, to be honest, not be a mom. And so when it became apparent that being a mom was also going to be part of my calling, it's an interesting thing. And again, I don't say that without being aware and sensitive that there are many women who would love to be moms, and many women who are single and aren't married and would love to be married and be a mom. And so it's not something I brag about without being sensitive to those women around me who might also like that calling and may not be able to. But for me, it really was a calling. Sean and I said that we would be open to having children, and lo and behold, we did. And so we are thankful. But again, it wasn't something I envisioned for myself. And so when I did, I had to figure out, what does this mean? I'm not 100% focused on career and church and work all the time, because now I have a husband. I mean, marriage did that. And then all of a sudden I have a husband and a dog, frankly. First I was a dog mom, and then I have a husband and a dog and now a son. And I still have this really, really full-time job that I want to be 110% committed to. And yet I can't be 110% committed to work and home and children and all of the things all of the time. And so I really struggled career-wise figuring out how to authentically minister at full capacity, honoring my commitments to church, but also honoring my commitments to my family. And it's always been a little bit of a juggling act. But I do feel that it's my calling to share my family and to help in the same way that church families were family for me, and they shared their families with us. I want to share my family with church family. And so this is a picture with a dear friend of mine, Tom Williams, who was on staff at South Maine. He retired while I was there, and then passed away about a year after his retirement from a blood cancer. This was after his retirement and while he was in the treatment phases. And so he was sitting at the back, but he was so proud of me, so proud of my son. And he just very special relationship of someone who invested in me, in my ministry and my family, and someone I was able to share the joy of my family with also. Again, now I'm here at First Baptist Church in Greensboro as a missions minister, which I think is full circle, though my story is not complete, I hope. And but it is a way that I am both serving in the local church, which I do feel is part of my calling, and getting to do missions and lead missions and help people understand the importance of missions, which I feel is a part of calling, and getting to parent two little boys who are full of love and life. And I feel that that's part of my calling. And so as I continue to grow and evolve, I'm continue to be excited about the ways God will continue to lead in my life And I hope that parts of my story have been helpful to you. But I really did want to emphasize that church families are important. Relationships that we have, even if you think you've just met a person for a moment, can have a big impact. And sometimes God weaves together different facets of our life to be part of one big calling and career. And now I stop sharing. Whoops.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy. Thank you for sharing. You've got a fascinating story. I'm glad you were one we asked to share with us.
Thank you.
And I'm gonna, Lynn, I'm gonna unmute you and also ask you to start your video. You'll get something that says start video. And Amy, yeah, there we go.
Sorry.
No, you're good. That's good. All right. So, and just a programming note, if Eileen doesn't show, and I've asked you already if she would share some of her story. You know, she hasn't had time, of course, to put together a program, but she has a fascinating story as well. So thank you, Amy, for sharing. I'm going to mute you and stop your video. And now we'll see Lynn. And Lynn, welcome. Share with us your story.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Amy. It was so wonderful to hear your story. Interesting how Nancy Sehested has been such an influence in so many people's lives. I met her when I was in seminary, and we continued a friendship throughout the years. But I'm so encouraged by your ministry, and thank you for what you're doing and what you've done through the years. It's very exciting to be a mom and a pastor and now missions minister. So thank you for that. Well, I'm delighted to be a part of this, and I'm going to read a few notes and share a few pictures. Unfortunately, because it's been a long time with a lot of my congregational ministry, I've started digging into some photos, but there are many that I did not have the opportunity to share with you. So we'll kind of pinch it here. So I'm going to share this. Let's see if it'll work. From my, let's see. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do this.
So if you'll scroll to the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says share.
And it's bringing up kind of a basic thing there. I wish I could get to my...
It should, there we go. Okay, we're seeing your screen now.
All right, there we go. And now I'll try to get to the first page of that. How about that?
Great.
Okay, there we go.
All right, you got it.
Terrific. Here we go. We'll see if we can get through this. All right, beginnings. So like many Baptist women in ministry, I was raised in the church. I was born actually in Maryland, but my family moved back to Kernersville, North Carolina when I was 2. And they were from there. And I was raised at First Baptist Church of Kernersville, where Amos Daniel was my pastor. I was baptized at 8 years old, participated in choir and sunbeams and children's ministries, and then girls auxiliary, GAs. Found a few of these pictures here. This is me on the left as a little girl, flower girl, for my very first coronation. I think I was a sunbeam then. And then to the right, I believe I was a queen there for queen, and then in the middle, queen with a scepter. GAs were so important in my life because it was there that we not only delved deeper into the scriptures, learning so many, but also studying missions and developing our possibilities as leaders in the congregation, in the church. Hearing the stories of missionaries around the world, especially women who were allowed and even encouraged to be missionaries. I I think I just grew up in a sort of understanding that God would call and use me as he had done in so many other women's lives. So that was a very, very important part of my life and development, I would say, early on. I, following graduation, getting a little ahead of myself here, following graduation from high school, I went to Carson Newman College thinking I would join the music department and be a church musician, high school choral teacher. That was sort of my interest. But then I shifted my studies. I think I had a little too much interest in everything else going on in the college. So I shifted my interest to political science. And then following graduation from Carson Newman College, I decided to broaden my world. And so leaving the, moving on up here. Leaving the church, I set out for Washington, D.C. For 6.5 years, I worked in Republican politics, campaigns, the Republican National Committee, the White House, Congressional Affairs for the Department of Agriculture. And when the ladder climb reached the lobbyist rung, I decided to jump off. I was disillusioned by Republican politics. I embarked on a spiritual quest. And so here's me at the White House for that year. And then I decided to go to North Carolina, and I worked with the Governor's Commission on Child Victimization. And I reconnected with old friends in my hometown, and I found my way back to church. I saw that the church's influence in the South was so strong that it had a tremendous potential for social harm or good. I thought a lot about churches promoting patterns of sexism and racism and other forms of domination, and when this happens, a de facto permission that's given to spouses and women and children, again, lesbian people, people of color. And on the other hand, it occurred to me that when the church contradicts the culture with a message of justice and equality, change really can occur. And I really wanted to be a part of this kind of message. So at age 27, in 1985, I enrolled at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina. And at the time, it was the most progressive and liberal, youngest of the Southern Baptist seminaries. And there I found real support from a community of faculty and students, as well as through my involvement with Pullman Memorial Baptist Church. In my third year, I created an internship away to work with Janice Seiler, who is a marriage and family therapist, to create Shalom Place, a retreat center at the beach. And I worked on the physical space, and I co-led retreats. And I also worked with her husband, Reverend Mahan Seiler, who was the pastor of Pullman Memorial Church, to create a theological residential community for 8 seminary students. And both projects familiarized me with the work of ministry-related nonprofits. In each, I was an administrator, public relations person, and while providing opportunities for me to participate in their visions for aspects of their ministry, both Mahan and Janice were tremendous mentors for me, very important to my own spiritual journey and my career in ministry that has evolved. As you can still see in this slide, I married during seminary to David Dixon, and we were married for about 4.5 years. But and this picture on the right, I just wanted to say, this is Dr. Glenn Miller. These 2 pictures were taken at a protest, actually, that the faculty and students participated in at Southeastern in my third year there. It was the sort of takeover of Southeastern of the kind of fundamentalist arm of the Southern Baptist Convention. And we together as faculty and students participated in that. It was a very difficult year for all of us, but we remained there, and I actually stayed another year until I graduated in my 4th year there. Well, when I graduated from there, David and I became teaching parents for Haven House, a residential program for adolescents who were experiencing emotional and behavioral difficulties. Our work provided a tremendous learning experience, but our marriage became strained and we both wanted to pursue our callings. So I began to look for a church while taking a basic CPE course at Wake Medical Center in Raleigh. And though they offered me a residency there, I felt a calling for congregational ministry actually through my years at seminary had not waned. And so I was called by Wake Forest Baptist Church in Winston-Salem. Um, 2 days after completing the unit. So in June of 1990, I entered what would become an 11.5-year ministry. It began as associate pastor for youth, children, and fellowship, and evolved into an associate pastor for education, youth, families, pastoral care, worship, congregational leadership, community outreach, especially in ministries of social justice. My ministry with Wake Forest Baptist Church was multitask. In addition to Christian education and youth ministry and supervising the children's ministry, I provided pastoral care and worship leadership. We created an alternative Baptist youth camp with other seminary chums, which will see its 28th summer this year. Staffed numerous committees, trained lay leadership, directed children's music, worked with boards and deacons in education and missions. And my years there were very creative and rich and challenging. As you can see, this picture here is with a family that I became very close to. Nikki Byers, the mom there, was the children's ministry coordinator. And these, I believe, all but one are her 9 children. Actually, her older son is missing. And the little tiny girl on the bottom left is Mahan Hazen, and she came to our congregation, was adopted from China. The children were a huge part of my life at Warris Church, and this family in particular became sort of nieces and nephews for me. They were very, very special. During these years, I also was involved with Baptist Women in Ministry in the state of North Carolina, serving on the board, and also the National Baptist Women in Ministry as well. Wake Forest Baptist Church was involved with the formation and development of Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. I was a young leader there. And also the Alliance of Baptists. The Alliance of Baptists formed actually first before the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship when I was still in seminary. And Ann Neal, Richard Groves, Alan Neely, Mahan Seiler, Nancy Sehested, Linda Weaver Williams. There were a number of folks, along with Stan Hasty, who was the first executive director. So the Alliance was a very important connection for me, as was the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. We participated in both on a national level and a statewide level, along with, as I said, Baptist Women in Ministry. These were all associations that fed our souls and encouraged our development of me and others of us as youngsters in the church in the 90s. I'd like to say a little more about Wake Forest Church. It has a history of being kind of at the forefront of place in the church today. The church racially integrated in the 60s. It affirmed membership and leadership of gay and lesbian persons in the early 90s. And in the late 90s, we discussed the history of marriage and the blessing of same-gender unions. And I had a pretty strong leadership role in that, and I had to navigate through some tough waters with the congregation. But we had so many members in the church and who had children who were gay and lesbian persons, and also members of the church. And our question that we were struggling with and discerned was, not only what is God calling us to do and to be in terms of welcome of all God's children, but how do we also include these members of our congregation so that they might be fully participant in the congregation and have their relationships honored and supported. So that was a long history of about 10 years, but a very important one as well. In August of 1995, my ministry with Wake Forest Baptist Church kind of took an outward turn into the community when our then mayor, Martha Wood, who was also a member of Wake Forest Baptist, invited me to serve as a co-chair of the South African Initiative. I wish I had some pictures of this. I was doing this with Dr. Alton Pollard, professor of sociology of religion at Wake Forest University. Dr. Pollard went on to become African American Studies program professor at Candler Theological Seminary. He was dean of Howard Divinity School, and I believe he is president now of a college in Kentucky. But at that time, our mission was to bring the Reverend Christian Frederick Beyers-Naday, a white Afrikaner pastor, who became perhaps the most powerful symbol to Black South Africans of the multiracial character of the struggle to end apartheid in South Africa. For white Afrikaners, he was an example of how one who'd been a powerful defender of the policy of apartheid can change and find common ground with Blacks to work towards a non-racist future of the nation. His and his wife's visit to our community was so powerful and pivotal for me. I mean, it was great to see your pictures of working in Pretoria too. Got to visit Bears and Nadia in South Africa and others there whom I'd met through this work. Working on this project opened my eyes to how little I knew about African American culture, history, heritage. I was born into a white, middle-class, Southern Baptist rural community, Kernersville, just outside of Winston-Salem. I was taught to be kind and polite and to maintain my place. My father led the silent majority in opposition to forced integration in the school system. So as a result, my only association with African Americans during my teenage years was through my participation in a citywide interracial choir, ironically created in response to the race riots of the late 60s. So, and that choir was at First Baptist Church on 5th Street, where I'm currently a member. So looking back, I realize now the seeds of racial consciousness were planted in me then. In 1998, I participated in the National Council of Churches Reframing the Dialogue on a pilot program led by the Reverend Sam Mann of Kansas City. The participants were all white ministers. And through that experience, I really learned that talking about racism isn't enough, and that making African American friends is really only a beginning. And what's required is a transformation of white culture that doesn't necessarily see its privilege or how systems can oppress others. I realized that I was on a personal journey of transformation, but even more, that I was called to be a witness to the white community. So it was some of the most difficult work that I had done, far more difficult than building cross-racial relationships. How do I challenge an in-grade systemic racism in my community. It's still a question today. How do I address white privilege? These are ongoing questions for me. And I, through the years, have increasingly understood that this white privilege requires tremendous responsibility. Well, an avenue emerged for me through participating in a community-wide, let me talk about my family. While all this is going on, this is my home and family. I lived in this little house for 30 years. These are my nephews, the little ones I'm playing with in the dirt. They're now 14 and 18. The bottom photos are of my niece and nephew, my nephew Tucker and his now current wife and child, and my sister-in-law, Hei Chung, and Cordia when she was a little girl, and then to the far right you see now her as a grown woman. And also picture of my parents, my mom and dad. My dad passed a couple of years ago. Immeasurable support from both my parents through the 23 years of congregational ministry, but more through my work as it has continued in my ministry, as it continued with Danbury Community Church. I was pastor there on 2003 to 2012. It's a little church in Stokes County. It was a union church, a Methodist and Presbyterian church. And there we provided a lot of ministries in the community: a firewood ministry, a clothing ministry, a health clinic, music ministry, literacy ministry. It was an amazing congregation of educators and kind of back to the earth folks who were living in a county that really needed a lot of support and care. I was doing this work while simultaneously working with what became to be known as Authoring Action. So back to that story. In the late 90s, just prior to my work with Danbury Community Church, an avenue opened. This is the story of Authoring Action. An avenue opened up for me to participate in a comprehensive community-wide partnership of law enforcement, service agencies, neighborhood groups, and clergy, and it was called Strategic Approaches to Community Safety, the SACSI initiative. And the mission was to reduce youth violence in Winston-Salem through a program called Operation Reach, where we would reach out to these young people, repeat offender youth, bring them in and tell them we wanted the violence to stop. We would go into their homes and listen to them and try to discern what kind of support they needed. We also really worked hard to think about how can we move teens out of violence. I worked alongside African-American clergy in those days, and I kept asking the question, how will we truly solve this problem of violence? It continues to be a question that I grapple with as I listen to the news this morning, that there are several schools right here in Forsyth County who are grappling with teens bringing guns to school. But the question that I asked in those days, which is about 18 years ago, how would we solve this problem if only adults are at the table trying to figure it out? If the voices and the stories of our young people are not privileged, how will the power structure, how will today the power structure ever really understand what our young people are up against when the very system wishing to reduce violence places our young people in that arena? So I began to think back then. I still think, as I said, about our school system, about the policies that we have of no tolerance, and how many young people, especially boys and girls of color, leave the schools. So these traditional avenues that support systemic racism, the industrial prison complex, we just needed an alternative approach. and we needed to draw outside the lines. So kind of turn things upside down, and I began to think about that. How could we do this kind of work to privilege these voices? So Winston-Salem is sort of the pioneer arts community. It's the first community arts council in the United States. It's home to the National Black Theater Festival, the North Carolina School of the Arts, the North Carolina Film School. There's so many grassroots poets, there are filmmakers, there are choreographers, there are visual artists. So I was thinking, well, perhaps we could somehow merge all of these to hear their voices. So at 8 a.m. on a Friday morning in February 2000, I picked up the Winston-Salem Journal to see on the front page Nathan Ross Freeman, who was a playwright and director working with the homeless, teaching them creative and performance arts writing. So I called him and I told him about this work that I was doing with the SACSI Initiative. And I explained my take on the issues involved. And I asked if he'd be willing to work with me to create a forum for youth voices to educate the community towards societal, familial, law enforcement, behavioral modification. And he said he would. Really small, as a summer intensive process, working with support from the Center for Community Safety, the Housing Authority, Recreation and Parks, the Southeastern Center for Contemporary Art, Wake Forest Baptist Church got them involved, and our mayor. And we started as the Summer Theater Arts Institute. And then we evolved into now Authoring Action. It starts in the summer with a 5-week intensive, culminating with an original live film and visual art performance. And the youth who successfully complete that then go into a year-round advanced writing workshops, and also become an outreach to the community to give voice to the community, to the community, giving their voices and their insights to educate the adults about what they need to have successful lives. Participants came originally from some of the most high crime areas in our community, and now it's expanded. Teens come from all over. It's very exciting to me because we have teens and artists working together to develop some of the most disenfranchised youth, but also alongside some of the more privileged youth in our community. So they begin to learn from each other about goals and dreams and alternatives for problem solving, for using their voices for change and for becoming active and engaged citizens in the world. This top right picture, you'll see Tony Jenkins, who went on to School of the Arts and is now in New York City. Through his writing, he submitted a play to the New York Fringe Festival and won. Sylvia, who's beside of me, has graduated from college, the first in her family, and is on our staff in the summers. She's an amazing composer and singer. Willie down on the left, who came to us after an effort to commit suicide, is in college, completing his degree. He's in his mid-20s now, but he is our assistant artistic director and a powerful poet and writer. Nani Egbuna over in the top left corner, she was from a more privileged Nigerian family, but her mother swears that Authoring Action not only developed her writing, but she was able to really see the power of her own voice and insight. She got a full ride to Duke this year and is doing work with documentary studies. Caitlin on the left, the very left corner, just graduated from the UNC Charlotte, a victim of sexual abuse in her middle school years by an English teacher. She was able to work through and process the pain of that experience and really discover her life and power and strength beyond victimization that she had experienced. I look down at these bottom pictures and I see young people and artists who have gone on to do amazing things with their lives, and some who have just become more aware, young adults who delayed parenthood, who have chosen to lead lives that are thoughtful and just be really powerful members of their community. On the very far right, in the far right corner, you'll see Nathan Ross Freeman. We continue to work together with Authoring Action. We call ourselves the co-founders. He's the artistic director, I'm the executive director. I continue to learn and be challenged by not only him, but all the young people that I work with to continue to deal with these issues that I started thinking about so long ago, and realize there's still so much work to be done in those churches. I'm really very be a part of First Baptist Church on Fifth. After 8.5 years of serving as pastor of Danbury Community Church, I gave full time to Authoring Action, and so I didn't go to church for a while. I needed kind of a sabbatical, and it was very important to me to really discern and dig in my garden and think through what time in my life it has become. And last year, I decided it was time to be back in church, but I wanted to be a part of a congregation where there was a female senior pastor. And I'd met Emily Hull McGee when she was in seminary at Wake Forest Divinity School, actually. And I thought, I'm going to go and hear her preach and be a part of a worship service there and experience that. And when I did, I just really fell in love with the congregation, with the worship, and with Emily, and with Amy McClure, who's also on staff, and the others who are there. This past Sunday, I was in worship, and it was Mother's Day, of course, and of course her sermon was so lovely, so powerful. But what struck me was as she was pronouncing the benediction and walking down the aisle, she grabbed her oldest son, Liam, who's right behind her in the photo, who was carrying a basket of roses for the moms, and they walked out together, and it just made me weep to see that those years in the 90s of us working so hard for women to become senior pastors, that this powerful woman and Emily is not only being such a powerful pastor of this evolving congregation that's in the middle of downtown Winston-Salem, but is able to do so with such grace and honoring her calling as a mom of these 3 beautiful children and a wife to Josh McGee, her husband. So I'm very excited to support not only her ministry, but the ministry of Amy McClure there, and all the other women in our community who are so powerfully serving congregations, not only here in Winston-Salem, but throughout North Carolina and our country and our world. It's been a pretty tremendous journey through the years to see this work. I will continue the work with Authoring Action until further light comes. The more the calling may emerge, but it's been a rich experience, and I'm very thrilled for my years in congregational life. I'm learning now how to be a member of a congregation, and also having some opportunities to serve and lead there. So thank you, Rick, for this opportunity, and to the CBF of North Carolina for always being a home for me. It's been good.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Lynn. I'm going to unmute everyone now and also invite Amy and Kathy to come back on video. I think I have to. And Lynn, thank you for sharing your story. That's, again, it's just so fascinating to hear both of you, your stories, and how, Robert Frost says, way leads to way. And like, you don't know what one person's influence is going to have on you so much, as Amy shared with Nancy Sehested, but then also how her way influenced Lynn, and so it's like, and I guess that's part of the role of BWIM and also of CBF North Carolina. We always try to have, if we're having a youth retreat, there's always going to be either a woman preacher or a woman leading in the music, because I think it's important for girls to see and boys to see that women can lead in a worship time. And so so I think it's part of our role too. But Kathy, I wanted to give you a chance to also share. And Lynn, if you would stop sharing your screen, which I think that's okay. I think you can go to the top of the screen. There we go. Good, thank you. And so Kathy, we've got a few minutes if you would want to share. Eileen wasn't able to join us, but if you could give us a whirlwind tour of your life, and then also share with us a little bit about Baptist Women in Ministry in North Carolina.
Yes, so glad to do that. And how wonderful to hear these stories from Lynn and Amy and be inspired. And that reminds me why we have Baptist Women in Ministry of North Carolina and Baptist Women in Ministry National and in other states, because we need to be reminded constantly that women are called by God for ministry. And a way that we do that is with an organization like BWIM, but also to tell each other stories, to open doors for women educationally, theologically, and professionally, and to build community that provides an environment where we can tell these stories and where we can experiment in life with these missions experiences and collaborating with others that helps us birth ideas. And when I look back on my life, I know that's been very important for me. And I owe so much to the way God has used women in congregations to work with me in Sunday school, in GAs, Lynn. I was a product of that system. In fact, my original goal in ministry, youth ministry, was always a call for me. But I had this idea in my head that I was going to be the state GA director for the state of Alabama, which is where I'm from. And so it's interesting that at almost the end of my career, I am now the executive director for Baptist Women in Ministry of North Carolina. And again, it makes me chuckle because that's where we see God's Spirit alive and work in our lives, where our dreams come true, but maybe not the way we dreamed them. And so that's interesting how I've seen that in my life. And Amy, I too was one of those people who wanted to be married, wanted to have a baby, and that was just not happening for me. And I was heartbroken about that, but kept doing ministry and met my husband when I was about 35 years old. We were married when I was 41 and I had a baby at 42. So I'm definitely on a different plan. And that also taught me that the plan for our lives with God and the Spirit's leading, and we have free will and free choice, but all that working together does not mean we have to be on a certain timeline. And that's exciting to me. That means that we can have all these experiences educationally and professionally, and God is constantly working with us to challenge us spiritually. And so with these opportunities for Baptist Women in Ministry to tell stories, open doors, and build community, that's our mantra with Baptist Women in Ministry of North Carolina. And we do that through regional lunches, bringing women together so that we can tell these stories, because when we're in isolation, we forget. Growing up in Alabama, I knew that I wanted to be like a woman that worked with me in Vacation Bible School, but I had not seen that demonstrated in a lot of areas. Then I graduate from college. I go to seminary, to Southern, back in the day when women were affirmed to be called to ministry. And am very thankful for the opportunities I've had to serve at First Asheville, First Cary, Forest Hills Baptist Church in youth ministry and college ministry, and then to get the opportunity to work in an academic environment at Baptist Theological Seminary at Richmond. What I learned there that took me to Cooperative Baptist Fellowship of North Carolina in leadership development, and now to Baptist Women in Ministry of North Carolina when I am already retirement age, but I was affirmed to give this a go, to be the first executive director for Baptist Women in Ministry of North Carolina. And I'm thrilled to do that and just look at that as the word that we've heard so much from Lynn and Amy, this process, this journey, this transformative experience makes me say, God is alive and well in our lives. And I'm so happy to be one of those that can continually learn and grow. Right now, I'm working on my Doctor of Ministry in creative leadership with an entrepreneurial spirit. So my word today are the words that I have behind me. This is one of our Baptist Women in Ministry banners, but it has our words. You can't see all of them, so I do want to read them. Supporting, encouraging, networking, strengthening, praying, serving, and leading. Baptist Women in Ministry of North Carolina wants to provide that for women who are called by God to ministry, and also for men who are called by God to ministry, and those men and churches and communities who support Baptist women. Rick, I have a thankful heart.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. And I'm just so happy you're there. Kathy and I worked together for many years. And when I found out that she was being tapped to be this, it was like, well, that is a no-brainer. Of course. Kathy is the person. So I appreciate what you're doing. And Kathy and I had a chance to chat a little bit beforehand today. And, she's learning all these things that we all need to know now, and communications and marketing and all of that kind of stuff that we weren't equipped for. And, there was no such thing to be equipped for. And I appreciate Lynn and Amy, y'all doing this as well, because I don't know how many webinars you guys have done, but for most people who come to the webinar, this is a first.